The first thing Shen Yao felt was pain. Not the clean, sharp kind she associated with accidents or hospital needles, but a dull, suffocating pressure that wrapped around her chest and crept up her throat, as if someone had stuffed cotton into her lungs. Incense smoke clogged the air, sweet and heavy, making her head throb. She opened her eyes. Red. Red everywhere. Silk curtains embroidered with gold thread hung from carved beams above her. Candles burned in tall bronze stands, their flames steady and mercilessly bright. A pair of red shoes sat neatly by the bed, toes pointed inward, like they were waiting for her to step into them. Shen Yao stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, her thoughts sluggish, refusing to line up. This wasn't her apartment. There was no peeling white paint, no buzzing fluorescent light, no half-finished manuscript on the desk reminding her she'd stayed up until 3 in the morning arguing with herself over metaphysics and narrative causality. Her last memory surfaced slowly. Curled up on the couch. Rain tapping against the window. A historical web novel open on her tablet. She'd scoffed at the plot, at the idiotic male lead, at the cannon fodder wife who ruined her family and died before she turned 25. I should have stopped reading, she murmured. Her voice sounded wrong. Softer. Younger. The word hadn't even fully left her mouth when the memories slammed into her. Not hers. A girl raised in a military household. Sheltered, earnest, desperate to be loved. A marriage decree bestowed like a favor from heaven. A man in ceremonial robes who never once looked at her eyes. Shen Yao's breath hitched. No, she whispered, fingers digging into the mattress. No, no, no. The name surfaced, uninvited. Shen Qingli. Daughter of General Shen. Marquis Gu Changye's lawful wife. The expendable ex-wife whose only purpose in the story was to bankroll a man's ambition, endure humiliation in silence, and die conveniently young so the real heroine could step into her place without guilt. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. This was a joke. A stress dream. Her brain misfiring after too much caffeine and bad fiction. She pushed herself up. The weight of the phoenix crown nearly snapped her neck. Careful, madam. A maid rushed forward, steadying her shoulders. The girl looked at her with open concern, eyes rimmed red as if she'd already cried today. Madam. The room tilted. Shen Yao swallowed and forced herself to breathe. Slow. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. If this was real, panicking wouldn't help. If it wasn't, she'd wake up eventually. She lifted her hands. Slender fingers. Pale skin. A faint red mark on the wrist where a bracelet had once been removed. Shen Qingli's body, exactly as described in the novel. The wedding day. Her chest went cold. Today was the day Gu Changye married her. And took another woman into his household. As if summoned by the thought, noise drifted in from outside. Laughter. Firecrackers. The clatter of cups and plates. A festive roar that had nothing to do with her. The maid hesitated, then said quietly, Madam, the Marquis has already escorted concubine Su through the side gate. Concubine Su. The female lead. Su Wanru. Shen Yao's fingers curled slowly against the quilt. In the book, Shen Qingli had sat here too. Swallowing tears. Telling herself that men of status all had concubines, that as long as she was the wife, everything would be fine. She'd endured the wedding night alone while the groom lifted another woman's veil. She remembered the line clearly. She'd hated it so much she'd underlined it. If she could just be more understanding, he would eventually see her goodness. Shen Yao let out a soft, humorless laugh. What a load of bullshit. The maid stiffened, clearly startled. Shen Yao didn't blame her. Shen Qingli had never spoken like that. She'd been gentle to the point of disappearing. Shen Yao closed her eyes, memories aligning with frightening clarity. The plot. The future. The way Shen Qingli's dowry would be siphoned off, piece by piece, to support Gu Changye's career. The way her family would be dragged down once the male lead needed a convenient scapegoat. The way she would die. Not dramatically. Not heroically. Just quietly, sick in bed, while everyone else moved on. A heat bloomed in Shen Yao's chest, sharp and steady, burning away the last traces of disbelief. No, she said again, this time with certainty. She wasn't a character. She wasn't a plot device. If fate had dragged her into this mess, then fate was going to have to deal with the consequences. She reached up and removed the phoenix crown herself, setting it down on the table with a dull clink. The sound felt final. "Help me change," she told the maid. The girl blinked. "Madam?" "But the ceremony there won't be one," Shen Yao said calmly. She stood, red silk pooling around her feet like spilled blood, and walked toward the door that led to her so-called husband. In her mind, the metaphysical patterns she'd studied for years began to hum to life. Cause and effect. Luck and backlash. The invisible threads people never noticed until they strangled them. Gu Changya had borrowed luck that wasn't his. And she had no intention of letting him keep it. Outside, the music swelled. Shen Yao stepped forward, lips curving into a faint, dangerous smile. Let the wedding begin. The main hall of the Marquis estate glowed with celebration. Red lanterns swayed under the eaves, casting warm light over rows of banquet tables already half filled with guests. Laughter rolled through the space in lazy waves, the kind born of good wine and better gossip. No one noticed when Shen Yao stepped into the hall without her phoenix crown. They noticed a heartbeat later. The music faltered. Conversation stuttered and died. Eyes turned, one after another, confusion spreading like spilled ink. The bride was supposed to enter supported by her matron, head bowed, face hidden behind a red veil. Shen Yao walked alone. Her wedding robes were still immaculate, but she'd loosened the collar just enough to breathe. Her hair fell freely down her back, glossy and unbound. There was no veil. No shy hesitation. Only a calm that made people uneasy. At the front of the hall, Gu Changya stood beside the ancestral altar. Tall, handsome in his formal robes, exactly as the novel had described him. The man who would one day command armies and loyalty with the same cold efficiency. And to his left, Su Wanru. She wore pale pink, delicate and understated, her eyes lowered in practiced meekness. If Shen Yao hadn't known better, she might have almost believed the act. Almost. Gu Changya frowned when he saw Shen Yao approach. Not concern. Not relief. Irritation. You're late, he said quietly, as if she were a servant who'd missed her cue. Something in Shen Yao's chest settled into place. So this was him. The man Shen Qingli had loved herself to death over. She stopped 3 paces away and looked at him properly for the first time. Not as a husband. Not as a future. Just a man. You've already taken a concubine, she said. Her voice carried easily through the hall. Why would I hurry? A ripple went through the crowd. Gu Changya's expression tightened. This is not the place for this. The Su family has shown generosity. Wanru entered quietly, without ceremony. You are still the main wife. Su Wanru lifted her head then, eyes glistening, lips pressed together as if holding back tears. Sister Shen, please don't misunderstand. I never intended to offend you. If I had known it would trouble you so, her voice trembled at just the right places. Shen Yao watched her with detached fascination. The control. The timing. Textbook manipulation. In the original story, this was where Shen Qingli would have panicked. She would have rushed to smooth things over, apologizing for causing trouble, swallowing humiliation to preserve a marriage that never existed. Shen Yao smiled instead. It wasn't wide. It wasn't kind. You misunderstand me, she said, turning slightly so everyone could hear her clearly. I'm not troubled. She met Gu Changya's eyes. I'm disgusted. The word dropped like a stone. Gu Changya's face darkened. Shen Qingli. Don't call me that, Shen Yao said lightly. At least, not with that tone. You've been using my family's silver to support yourself for 3 years. You used it to buy this estate, these robes, and the gifts you sent to the Su household. You even used my dowry funds to bribe your way into the capital postings. Murmurs exploded across the hall. Su Wanru's face went pale. Gu Changya took a sharp step forward. Watch your words. I am, Shen Yao replied. Very carefully. She turned and clapped her hands once. The sound rang loud and crisp. From the side entrance, her servants filed in. Each carried a wooden chest or a bound ledger. They moved with military precision, setting everything down in neat rows at the center of the hall. One chest opened. Silver ingots gleamed under the lantern light. Another revealed deeds and contracts. The last held letters. Intimate ones. Shen Yao walked to the table and picked up the thickest ledger, flipping it open with practiced ease. I stayed up all night, she said conversationally. Turns out numbers don't lie, even when people do. She read aloud, calm and unhurried. Dates. Amounts. Purposes. Every tale that had flowed from the Shen household into Gu Changya's hands. Gasps followed each line. This one, she said, tapping the page, was supposedly for winter military supplies. Funny thing is, those supplies ended up as jade hairpins and silk bolts delivered to the Su residence. Su Wanru swayed, catching herself on the table. That's not true. Silence, Shen Yao said, not raising her voice. The air shifted. It was subtle, something only those sensitive to it might notice. The lantern flames flickered, bowing inward for a brief second. Shen Yao felt the familiar alignment settle, her awareness brushing against threads of luck and debt tangled tightly around Gu Changya. Borrowed fortune always screamed when confronted. She closed the ledger and held it out. In total, she said, Marquis Gu owes the Shen family 100,000 taels of silver. The number thundered through the hall. Gu Changya stared at her as if seeing a stranger. You would humiliate your husband in public for money? Shen Yao laughed softly. It surprised even her. No, she said. I'm canceling an investment. She turned to the crowd, inclining her head slightly. Esteemed guests, thank you for attending today's banquet. Unfortunately, the wedding will not proceed. I, Shen Yao of the Shen military household, formally withdraw from this marriage. She faced Gu Changya one last time. Return what you owe, she said. Or I'll make sure the entire capital knows exactly how you built your reputation. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. Shen Yao felt it then. The shift. The thread snapping loose. Somewhere deep in her chest, something long suppressed exhaled. She turned and walked out, red silk brushing the floor behind her. The firecrackers outside went off late, sharp and chaotic. No one applauded. But no one tried to stop her either. And as Shen Yao stepped beyond the gates of the Marquis estate, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. The plot had already begun to unravel. The Shen residence had always smelled like iron and pine. Even after years in the capital, even after her father's death and her brother's scattered postings, the air inside the estate carried the faint bite of weapons and old discipline. It should have felt reassuring. Instead, Shen Yao felt cold the moment she stepped through the gates. Not physical cold. Something deeper. Like a draft in a place that was supposed to be sealed. Her mother was waiting in the main courtyard, flanked by 2 aunts and a cluster of servants. When she saw Shen Yao, her composure cracked. She crossed the stone path too quickly, hands trembling as she reached out. Yaoer, she whispered, gripping her daughter's sleeves as if afraid she might disappear. Are you hurt? They said you walked out of the wedding hall yourself. I thought I'm fine, Shen Yao said softly. She meant it. For the first time since waking up in this body, she truly was. She looked at her mother properly then. Madame Shen's hair had more silver than Shen Yao remembered from the novel. The lines around her eyes were deeper, carved by worry that never seemed to lift. The book had glossed over this part. It always did. It only mentioned that the Shen family began to decline after Shen Qingli's death. Now she knew better. This wasn't decline. This was being drained. That night, after reassuring her mother and sending the servants away, Shen Yao walked the estate alone with a lantern in hand. She traced the familiar paths, letting the rhythm of her steps calm her thoughts. The patterns jumped out at her almost immediately. Wind that refused to circulate. Water channels angled just slightly wrong. Decorative stones arranged in a way that interrupted rather than guided flow. Subtle. Clever. Malicious. She stopped at the back courtyard. The old mulberry tree stood there, its branches heavy and drooping despite the season. Shen Yao stared at it for a long moment, then crouched and pressed her palm to the ground. The answer rushed up her arm. A formation. Buried deep. Her jaw tightened. She rolled up her sleeves, unbothered by the dirt, and began digging. It took nearly an hour before her shovel struck something solid. A blackened wooden box. The moment it was exposed, the air shuddered. The lantern flame flared violently, then steadied. Shen Yao pried the box open with a sharp twist of her wrist. Inside lay a bundle of yellowed talismans soaked in dried blood, knotted red thread wrapped around a small clay figurine. The figurine's face was carved crudely, but the name etched into its back was painfully neat. Shen Yao. Her eldest brother. Her stomach twisted. In the original story, Shen Yao's legs had been crippled by an accident on the battlefield. It was treated as misfortune. No one questioned it. Shen Yao closed her eyes. "Step Aunt Lu," she said quietly. The answer fit too well. Lu Shi had married into the family after her father's death, all smiles and gentle words. She managed the household accounts. She'd insisted on redesigning the back courtyard to improve feng shui. And Lu Shi had been very close to the Su family. Rage rose hot and sharp, but Shen Yao forced it down. Anger without control ruined formations. She worked through the night. Salt, cinnabar, ink mixed with her own blood. She broke the formation node by node, whispering incantations under her breath, each word heavy with intent. When she finally crushed the clay figurine beneath her heel, the wind howled through the courtyard like a long-held breath being released. Somewhere in the estate, a door slammed. At dawn, Shen Yao screamed. The household erupted into chaos. Shen Yao ran to her brother's room just as physicians were being summoned. Shen Yao lay drenched in sweat, face twisted in pain. But this time, the pain wasn't spreading. It was retreating. By noon, color had returned to his lips. By evening, he was asleep for the first time in months without medicine. Madame Shen wept quietly at his bedside, gripping Shen Yao's hands with desperate gratitude she didn't yet have words for. The next day, trouble arrived at the gates. A man in dark clothes stood outside the Shen residence, posture straight despite the long road dusting his boots. His face was partially hidden behind a plain black mask, but his presence was impossible to ignore. Not threatening. Weighty. Like a mountain that had learned to walk. "I'm here to seek temporary shelter," he said, voice low and even. "My name is Junan. My father was once a friend of General Shen." The gatekeeper hesitated. Word had already spread about the wedding scandal. Everyone was on edge. Shen Yao arrived just then. The moment her eyes landed on the masked man, the world shifted. She saw it instantly. Golden light. Dense. Blazing. Coiled around him like a second skin. Merit so thick it made her scalp prickle. Her heart skipped, not with romance, but with awe. This wasn't ordinary. This was someone who had walked through blood and fire and somehow come out owing the world nothing. She stepped forward. "We have room," she said without hesitation. Junan's gaze flicked to her, sharp beneath the mask. "You don't know who I am." "I know enough," Shen Yao replied. She studied the way he stood, the way his breath never wavered. A man accustomed to danger. To command. To loss. And to secrets. "Stay," she said. "In return, you'll serve as my personal guard." A faint pause. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was quiet and brief, like he hadn't meant to let it escape. "You're an interesting woman, Lady Shen." Shen Yao smiled. "I know," she said. As he followed her inside, the golden light around him brushed her senses again, warm and steady. For the first time since she'd arrived in this world, Shen Yao felt something close to reassurance. Fate had sent her an ally. Whether it knew it or not. By the third day after Shen Yao returned to her family, the story had already grown teeth. Some said she'd gone mad after being jilted. Others whispered that she'd learned crooked arts during her years of seclusion. By the time the rumors reached the tea houses near South Market, her name was spoken with a mixture of fascination and unease. And then Master Tianqiu arrived. He came in a cloud of incense and arrogance, riding a lacquered carriage plastered with talismans. His disciples cleared the street as if the very stones should bow beneath his feet. "I've been invited," he announced loudly, "to cleanse the Shen residence of malignant forces brought on by a woman who meddles with fate." The invitation, of course, had come from the Su family. Shen Yao watched from behind the lattice window as he strutted into the courtyard, robes embroidered with water patterns that tried far too hard to look profound. She could feel it even from here. The emptiness behind his cultivation. All noise. No foundation. Junan stood behind her, silent as ever. "He's dangerous," he said at last. "Not to me," Shen Yao replied. "To himself, maybe." She stepped outside before anyone could stop her. Master Tianqiu turned, eyes sharp as knives. You must be Shen Yao. The woman who broke her own marriage and invited calamity into her home. She inclined her head politely. You must be the man who sells river water as holy dew. Laughter rippled through the watching servants before they could catch themselves. Tianxiu's smile froze. You dare insult me? You insult yourself, Shen Yao said calmly. Your formation leaks on the east side. Your talismans are drawn backward. And your incense hides the smell of decayed spiritual roots. The courtyard went dead silent. Tianxiu's face flushed. Nonsense. I've cultivated for 40 years. And stolen merit for 20, Shen Yao said. Mostly from grieving families who didn't know better. She walked a slow circle around him, eyes tracing the flow of energy clinging to his robes. You've been feeding on resentment, she said. It keeps you standing, but it also eats you from the inside. Didn't you notice your left hand shaking at night? Tianxiu staggered back a step. Junan's hand tightened on his sword. Enough. Tianxiu snarled and slammed his staff into the ground. Fine. If you claim to be righteous, prove it. Let the heavens judge. He raised a talisman high, chanting rapidly. The air thickened. Clouds rolled unnaturally overhead. Servants cried out as the wind whipped through the courtyard, tearing petals from branches. Shen Yao didn't move. She simply lifted her sleeve and flicked her wrist. A thin slip of paper fluttered down, landing at Tianxiu's feet. A suppression talisman. The wind died instantly. The cloud stilled, as if embarrassed. Tianxiu screamed as the backlash hit him, dropping to his knees. Blood trickled from his nose as his staff cracked down the middle. You've confused noise with authority, Shen Yao said softly. The heavens don't listen to shouting. By noon, Tianxiu had been dragged away by the city guards, his crimes exposed by the very records he'd falsified. The capital exploded. Within days, Shen Yao's name reached the ears of noble households. Requests flooded in. Lost items. Sick children. Strange dreams. She accepted only 3. The third changed everything. Lady Qiao, a minor noblewoman with eyes hollowed by years of grief, knelt in Shen Yao's study and clutched her sleeve. They said my daughter drowned, she whispered. But I still hear her crying in my dreams. Shen Yao closed her eyes, followed the thread, and opened them again with certainty. She's alive, she said. And she's not far. 3 days later, a trembling girl was reunited with her mother in a wine shop near the eastern docks. The story spread like wildfire. That was when the palace summoned her. The Empress Dowager disliked metaphysics. Everyone knew that. She believed fate should be feared, not touched. Shen Yao entered the palace hall with her spine straight and her hands steady, Junan at her side. You, the Empress Dowager said coldly, are the one who stirs the capital. I only respond to what already exists, Shen Yao replied. Before the tension could snap, Junan stepped forward and removed his mask. Gasps rippled through the hall. Your Majesty, he said, kneeling. I am Chu Yan, King of Beichu. The man who was supposed to be dead. The Empress Dowager went rigid. Before she could speak, Shen Yao felt a tug. A familiar thread. Old grief. Hidden beneath layers of denial. She met the Empress Dowager's eyes. You're missing someone, she said gently. A child. The woman's breath caught. My granddaughter, she whispered. Wanner. Shen Yao nodded. She's alive. Silence fell. In that moment, with the weight of the palace pressing down on her, Shen Yao understood something clearly. She had crossed a threshold. There was no going back. The Shen household did not sleep that night. News from the palace spread in low, disbelieving murmurs through every courtyard. Servants whispered behind sleeves. Guards stood straighter. Even the lanterns seemed brighter, as if the walls themselves were listening. Shen Yao sat in her study long after midnight, fingers resting on the edge of the desk, replaying the moment Junan had removed his mask. Chu Yan, King of Beichu. Alive. And standing at her side as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She exhaled slowly. You could have warned me, she said without looking up. Junan, no, Chu Yan, stood near the window. Moonlight traced the sharp line of his jaw, the faint scar near his temple she hadn't noticed before. If I had, he said, would you have let me stay? She paused. Then, honestly, yes. That earned her a glance. Not amused. Not disbelieving. Thoughtful. The silence between them shifted, no longer empty. Before either of them could say more, hurried footsteps echoed outside. Shen Yao's second brother, Shen Yi, burst in, face pale and eyes rimmed red. "Sister," he said hoarsely. "I need your help." She stood at once. They sat together in the inner room, oil lamp flickering between them. Shen Yi's hand shook as he pressed them together, knuckles white. "Zhao Ruyan is with child," he said. "She says it's mine." Shen Yao didn't answer immediately. She watched his face. The confusion. The hope he was afraid to admit. "And you don't believe her," she said. His throat bobbed. "I want to. But something feels wrong." Shen Yao reached out and took his wrist, 2 fingers pressing lightly against his pulse. She closed her eyes. The answer was immediate. Cold. Deceptive. She opened her eyes. "It's not yours," she said quietly. Shen Yi sucked in a sharp breath. "Then whose?" She didn't soften it. "Qin Heng. His so-called friend. The man who drank with him, praised his essays, and borrowed his notes." The room went very still. "I saw them," Shen Yao continued. "Not together. Not yet. But the threads are tangled tight. This isn't an accident. It's a plan." Shen Yi's shoulders slumped. "I trusted them." "I know," she said gently. That trust, she knew, was exactly what they were counting on. 2 days later, Shen Yao invited Zhao Ruyan to tea. The woman arrived smiling, one hand resting protectively on her stomach, eyes red as if she'd cried just enough to look sincere. "Sister Shen," she said softly. "I was afraid you hated me." Shen Yao poured the tea herself. "Why would I hate you?" Zhao Ruyan relaxed, just a little. That was her mistake. The guests arrived shortly after. Qin Heng. A handful of distant relatives. A family physician. When the physician finished examining Zhao Ruyan, Shen Yao spoke. "Tell us," she said. "How far along is she?" The man hesitated. 4 months. Shen Yao nodded. "Interesting." She turned to Shen Yi. "You returned from the border 3 months ago." Zhao Ruyan's smile shattered. The room erupted. Qin Heng tried to speak. Guards stepped forward. When the truth finally lay naked and bleeding between them, Shen Yi didn't shout. He didn't beg. He simply stood. "Get out," he said. Zhao Ruyan collapsed, sobbing. Qin Heng was dragged away. Later, as the courtyard emptied, Shen Yao found Chu Yan waiting beneath the eaves. "You're ruthless," he said. She shrugged. "I'm efficient." He studied her for a long moment. "You proposed to me," he said finally. "I did." "You weren't joking." "No." A pause. "And if I say no?" She met his gaze evenly. "Then I'll accept it. But I won't pretend I didn't see what was there." Something unreadable crossed his face. Before he could answer, a messenger arrived with blood on his sleeve. An assassination attempt. Failed. Barely. Chu Yan's expression hardened. Shen Yao straightened. This wasn't random. "No," he agreed. "It never is." She smiled faintly. "Good," she said. "Then let's find out who's pulling the threads." The imperial examinations turned the capital into a furnace. Scholars flooded the streets in pressed robes, faces pale with nerves and ambition. Inns raised their prices overnight. Tea shops stayed open until dawn. Everyone spoke in whispers, as if loud voices might frighten away fortune. Shen Yao stood at the edge of the examination compound and watched her brother disappear through the gates. Shen Yi paused, turning back once. She smiled at him, small and steady. His eyesight, once dulled and aching from a curse he'd never known existed, was clear now. He walked straighter than he ever had, carrying not borrowed confidence, but his own. "Write what you know," she'd told him the night before. "Nothing else." He nodded and went in. The days dragged. On the 3rd day, rumors surfaced. Someone had bought the questions. Someone had been seen copying answers. The name whispered was Qin Heng. Shen Yao heard it while drinking tea with a shopkeeper who spoke too freely for his own good. She set her cup down carefully. So that was his play. She didn't act immediately. Instead, she waited. When the examination results were posted, the crowd surged like a tide. Names were shouted, laughed over, cursed at. Shen ranked third. For a heartbeat, Shen Yao forgot to breathe. Then she laughed, sharp and bright, startling the people around her. Behind the joy, something else clicked into place. Because Qin Heng ranked fourth. Too close. Too perfect. That night, Shen Yao paid a visit to the Ministry of Rights. She didn't break in. She didn't need to. A sealed envelope. A copied essay. A thread of fate that didn't belong. The officials argued at first. Then she laid out the handwriting comparisons. The purchased questions traced back to a pawnshop. The original draft of Shen Yi's essay, still stained with ink, matching line for line. By dawn, warrants were issued. Qin Heng was dragged from his bed in front of his entire household. He screamed about injustice. About conspiracy. No one listened. When the truth was announced publicly, the capital roared. The Qin family collapsed within a week. Assets seized. Titles revoked. Doors slammed shut wherever they turned. And Gu Changya, Shen Yao saw him one last time in a tea shop near the eastern gate. He looked smaller. Thinner. His robe was clean but worn, the color faded by too many washes. People whispered when they passed him, not with fear, but ridicule. He didn't see her at first. When he did, his face drained of color. "You ruined me," he said hoarsely. Shen Yao tilted her head. "No." She stood, adjusting her sleeves. "I stopped paying for you." She left him there, staring into a cold cup of tea he could no longer afford. That evening, Shen Yi returned home to lanterns and laughter. He bowed deeply to Shen Yao. "Thank you." She hugged him instead. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. Fate could be rewritten. And she was getting good at it. The room smelled like medicine and rain. Shen Yenzhou lay on the bed, eyes open, staring at the beams above him as if he'd memorized every crack over the years. His legs rested beneath thick quilts, useless as they had been since the battlefield accident everyone pretended was just bad luck. Shen Yao stood at his bedside, sleeves rolled, hair tied back simply. No ceremony. No audience. Only truth. "You don't have to do this," Shen Yenzhou said quietly. "I've lived like this long enough." She looked at him, really looked at him. The brother who had once carried her on his shoulders, who'd taught her how to hold a spear even when their mother scolded them both. "You shouldn't have had to," she said. Chu Yan stood near the door, present steady and contained. He hadn't asked what she intended to do. He already knew it wouldn't be simple. Shen Yao sat and placed her hands over her brother's knees. She closed her eyes. The curse was old. Deep. Entangled with another life. She felt it immediately. A tether stretching far beyond this room, tight and ugly, anchored somewhere it didn't belong. Gu Changya. Her jaw tightened. "You stole," she murmured under her breath. "And you never thought to look back." She drew the formation slowly, deliberately, using her own blood and Chu Yan's presence like a stabilizing anchor. His merit flared warm and steady, not overwhelming, just enough to keep her from being torn apart by backlash. Pain lanced through her. She bit it back, refusing to cry out. The curse resisted. Screamed. Then fractured. Shen Yenzhou gasped, arching sharply before collapsing back onto the bed, sweat soaking the sheets. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his toes twitched. Shen Yao's breath hitched. Again. A deliberate movement this time. Shen Yenzhou stared, disbelief shattering into something raw and broken. He let out a sound that was half a sob, half a laugh. "I can feel them," he whispered. Shen Yao sagged back, dizzy, blood pounding in her ears. Chu Yan caught her before she fell. At that exact moment, across the city, Gu Changya screamed. The backlash hit him like a collapsing wall. He vomited blood onto the floor of his rented room, legs spasming as agony ripped through him. The borrowed fortune tore itself free, returning to its rightful owner with interest. By nightfall, Gu Changya couldn't stand. Panic ate him alive. That panic found a voice. "Su Wanru. They're going to finish you," she whispered, eyes bright with fear and something sharper. "Unless you strike first." The fire started just before midnight. Flames clawed up the side of Shen Yanzhou's room, smoke pouring into the corridors. Servants screamed. Bells rang. Shen Yao was already moving. She tore through the smoke, heart slamming against her ribs, finding her brother as guards dragged a struggling figure to the courtyard. Gu Changya. Soot-streaked. Wild-eyed. He collapsed to his knees when he saw her. I didn't mean to, he sobbed. She said it was the only way. Shen Yao looked at him, really looked. And felt nothing. Take him, she said. The chains closed. As dawn broke, Shen Yanzhou took his first step. It was shaky. Uneven. But it was his. And Shen Yao stood watching, tears finally falling, knowing something precious had been returned. At a terrible cost. The interrogation chamber smelled of damp stone and fear. Gu Changya sat bound to a wooden chair, his luxurious robes tattered and dust-streaked, eyes wide with panic. He looked every bit the man who had once borrowed the world and failed to pay it back. Shen Yao entered, calm and steady, the faint weight of Chu Yan's presence behind her lending an invisible shield. You've made a lot of enemies, she said quietly. And you've finally met one who doesn't flinch. Gu Changya glared. You'll regret this. Perhaps, Shen Yao said, leaning slightly forward, but I've learned a few things about debts and consequences. She pressed a hand to the table between them. Her fingers traced a talismanic pattern, invisible to anyone else, one that drew the truth out. And the truth came tumbling. Gu Changya's confession started slow, each word like pulling teeth. He told of the voodoo doll, the talismans he'd used to swap fates with Shen Yanzhou, and the stolen battlefield merits that had crippled his elder brother. His voice trembled as he admitted how he had leaned on Su Wanru, how her manipulations had guided his ambition, and how he had destroyed what he didn't understand. The doll, she told me it would secure my future, he admitted, eyes darting to Shen Yao. I didn't know it would cripple my brother, she interrupted, voice cold. You didn't think, but you did it anyway. He shrank back under her gaze. And then came the revelation that froze the room. Su Wanru, the supposedly sweet concubine, had a true partner in crime. Not just a puppet master, but a schemer more dangerous than either Gu Changya or the minor sorcerer Fa Ming. Prince Yun, Chu Yun Gue, the unassuming, seemingly unambitious royal, had been pulling the strings all along. Shen Yao's eyes narrowed. The subtle thread she had sensed months ago, the corruption, the embezzlement, the assassination attempts, it all led here. And Fa Ming, she asked, voice level. Where does he fit in? Gu Changya swallowed. He's her ally. A disgraced sorcerer, expelled from the capital. He orchestrated much of the spiritual manipulation, the curses, the false accidents, the whispers in the right ears at the right time. Without him, none of this could reach its full effect. Shen Yao let out a slow breath. Her mind worked quickly, untangling layers of deceit. She thought of the formation she had destroyed in her backyard. The crippling of her eldest brother. The manipulations of her step-aunt. The subtle guidance that had forced Gu Changya into desperation. Every thread connected. Every betrayal accounted for. And the prince, she asked again, eyes sharp. Everything, Gu Changya admitted, voice nearly broken. The corruption in Jiangnan, the attempts on the king's life, every misstep, every false accusation. He's the root of it all. Shen Yao's lips pressed into a thin line. Her fingers tapped lightly on the table. Chu Yan's presence behind her flared slightly, warm and solid, as if sensing her tension. She glanced back briefly, and the steady reassurance in his eyes grounded her. We're going to undo him, she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. All of it. Gu Changya swallowed again, fear finally eclipsing his arrogance. You can't. Shen Yao leaned in, voice sharp as winter air. I already have. Outside, the city carried on, unaware. But inside the stone walls of the interrogation chamber, the first dominoes were beginning to fall. Shen Yao knew the path ahead would be dangerous. Yun would not act openly, and Fa Ming's cunning had already proven he could manipulate anyone foolish enough to trust him. But for the first time, she felt the balance of fate tipping. And she intended to tip it all the way back. The road to Shanghua Temple was deceptively quiet. Shen Yao's carriage rumbled over cracked stone, flanked by Jun and No, Chu Yan and a small escort of loyal retainers. Mist clung to the trees like gauze, twisting shadows into monstrous shapes. The air smelled of damp earth and incense, heavy, almost suffocating. She had predicted this approach. Everything about the invitation had smelled of deceit, but the prince's trap had been carefully hidden behind a veil of ceremony and courtesy. "Why here?" Chu Yan muttered, scanning the fog-shrouded temple grounds. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, casual but ready. Shen Yao's eyes traced the path ahead. Power is concentrated in this place. Ancient formations, talismans buried for decades, perfect for an ambush that leeches life and merit. Chu Yan's eyebrows rose. "And you're ready for it?" She smiled faintly. "I never come unprepared." The temple loomed ahead, a cluster of aged buildings, blackened wood streaked by rain and smoke, moss creeping over carved stone lions whose eyes seemed to follow every step. Junan flanked her closer now. The golden merit surrounding him seemed to pulse, sensing danger, giving her subtle cues she would never have noticed alone. As they stepped through the main gate, the first talisman struck. Hidden runes etched into the stone beneath their feet flared faintly. Shen Yao froze, lifted her sleeve, and drew intricate counternotations in the air. They shimmered briefly, neutralizing the attack before it could trigger. "Smart," Chu Yan murmured, eyes sweeping for other threats. "You think I didn't see the plot in the book," she replied, calm but tense. "I know exactly how Yun planned to use this place." A sudden chorus of chanting echoed from the main hall. Figures appeared, masked sorcerers, including Fa Ming, who bowed low with calculated politeness. Their hands wove through the air, summoning the 5 elements annihilation formation. Flames, water, earth, wind, and a crackling spiritual energy converged into a circle that shimmered and pulsated with lethal intent. Shen Yao didn't flinch. She had expected this. From her sleeves, she drew protective talismans, ancient ones she had adapted for the modern body she now inhabited. She moved gracefully, placing them on the ground, on her allies, on Chu Yan himself. The formation activated fully. Air burned with static. Trees groaned. The stone beneath their feet vibrated as if the mountain itself were screaming. Each pulse of the formation tried to leech their life force, their luck, and their merit. But Shen Yao's counter-talisman network stabilized them. The formation shuddered, faltered. Fa Ming's eyes widened. "Impossible," he hissed. Shen Yao stepped forward. "Calm. Confident. Dangerous. Your setup is precise, but it's still linear. You followed the book. You made the same mistake as every villain before you, you assumed the cannon fodder wouldn't fight back." Chu Yan drew his sword, cutting through the energy that lingered like sticky smoke. Each strike resonated, unraveling the formation strand by strand. Junan's presence amplified the effect, the golden merit around him blended with Shen Yao's spiritual force, making the collapse inevitable. Yun, hidden in the shadows, cursed under his breath. The trap that had been years in the making was unraveling in seconds. He realized, too late, that he had underestimated the one person who had always been the cannon fodder, the one he assumed would fail without realizing she had been rewriting the story the entire time. Shen Yao's eyes met his across the hall, calm and merciless. "You relied on fear, greed, and borrowed power. But you forgot one thing." She raised her hand. A subtle gesture, almost casual, and the formation shattered like glass. The spiritual backlash of its collapse hurled Fa Ming backward, knocking him unconscious. The air cleared, leaving the temple eerily silent except for the heavy, ragged breaths of those still standing. Yun's expression twisted from anger to shock. Chu Yan stepped forward, sword poised, but Shen Yao held up a hand. "I will deal with him," she said. "You've had your fun. It ends now." Every eye in the temple, loyalists and conspirators alike, felt the weight of her authority. Calm, precise, and terrifying in her certainty, she had turned a trap into a proving ground and emerged unscathed. Chu Yan's hand brushed against hers as she turned, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The fight was far from over, but the first strike had been hers. And for the first time, Prince Yun realized that he had underestimated the one person who didn't just survive the story, she rewrote it. The air over the Shen household felt lighter than it had in years. Sunlight streamed through open windows, carrying the smell of spring and the faint tang of smoke from the Xianghua temple showdown that had finally ended. The city was alive with whispers of Shen Yao's victories, the public eager to celebrate the fall of the corrupt, the exposed, and the treacherous. Shen Yao walked through the courtyard, Jun and Chu Yan by her side. Her eldest brother, Shen Yao, had taken steady steps this morning, the first real ones in more than a decade. His legs, once crushed by a cruel twist of fate, were whole. His grin was wide, unguarded, and the sound of his laughter felt like a bomb. Shen Yi, her second brother, held his exam scroll proudly. His victory over Qin Heng and the exposed cheating had not only restored the family's honor but also secured his place as one of the most promising scholars in the capital. Even Shen Yao's youngest brother, who had been hidden from many dangers, now ran freely across the courtyard, safe under the protection she had woven. Chu Yan stopped at her side, eyes watching her with that steady, unreadable expression she had learned to read like a map. "You did all this," he said quietly. "All of it. Alone?" Shen Yao shook her head. "Not alone. Junan, my brothers, everyone who deserved protection helped. I just made sure the strings didn't tangle." Chu Yan's hand brushed hers, strong and grounding. "You're ruthless." "I'm efficient," she said, smirking, though the warmth in her chest made her smile feel real. The city was quiet for the moment, but not for long. Yun and Fa Ming had been arrested at Xianghua Temple. The evidence of their corruption, treachery, and countless crimes was irrefutable. Public trials were scheduled, and the news had already spread through the imperial networks. Gu Changya, reduced to ruin, was confined, no longer a threat. Su Wanru had been quietly taken into custody as well, her schemes and manipulations exposed. Shen Yao allowed herself a small exhale. The final step remained. Chu Yan had taken the lead in consolidating their political victories, ensuring the imperial family's favor while shielding the Shen household from lingering threats. And now, at last, he looked at her with that calm that carried the weight of unspoken emotion. "You can speak now," he said. Shen Yao hesitated, feeling the pulse of the golden merit that always seemed to follow him. Then she stepped closer. "I proposed before," she said. "Because someone like you should know exactly what she wants." Chu Yan's gaze softened, just slightly, the first crack in the armor he wore for the world. "I accept," he said simply. Relief, warmth, and a strange fluttering filled her chest. Not because of power or victory, but because the fight had ended, and the person beside her had survived it all. The family gathered shortly afterward for the formal announcement of their restored fortunes. Eldest brother, able to walk; second brother, the scholar; third brother, safe; Shen Yao herself, recognized by the imperial family as a master of metaphysics. Every piece of the puzzle was in place. Later, in the private courtyard, Chu Yan handed her a ring, simple but elegant. "It suits you," he said. Shen Yao laughed lightly. "I suppose a ruler deserves someone who can survive a plot designed to kill her multiple times over." He inclined his head. "And you survived more than anyone suspected. I'm lucky to have you at my side." Shen Yao's lips curved into a genuine smile, free of scheming, free of danger. "No. We're lucky to have each other." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the Shen household glowed in warmth, prosperity, and peace. The villains had fallen, justice had been served, and her story was finally hers. Chu Yan took her hand, leading her to the balcony overlooking the city. The capital stretched endlessly, alive with light and life, and Shen Yao felt a rare kind of stillness settle over her. For the first time, she could breathe. The future was unwritten. And she was ready to write it herself.